In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, I bear witness there is no God but God, and God is the only one who has the right to be worshipped, and I also bear witness that Prophet Moses, Prophet Jesus, and Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, are the messengers of God, and I seek refuge in Allah from the rejected Satan. So I got a lot of information in this video. I got a lot of verses to discuss. We're going to be discussing about the divine law of trade, how Imam Mahdi, the Mashiach, will bring about global justice through trade, through bringing about the implementing the divine laws of Allah. All the governments of the world, all the states and kingdoms of the world, they're all run, all their legislation is run on commerce. They're all commerce legislation. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. There's other people who discuss about the injustices that go on in these governments and states and kingdoms. But here I'm going to bring out the solutions to our problems, and these are implementing these divine laws that Allah has revealed to us in His beautiful books of guidance, like the Quran and Torah and the Gospels of Jesus, etc. So let's get right into it. We're going to go to chapter 2, verses 198. There is no blame for you that you seek the munificence from your Lord by trading during the time of Hajj, when you pour forth in large numbers from Arafat, and then glorify Allah with still more praises near Mash'ar al-Haram, holy mosque in Muzdalifah, and remember Him with gratitude as He has guided you, though formerly you were certainly amongst the astray. So we are allowed, Allah is saying, Allah has given us the permission to trade during Hajj. So that's the pilgrimage to Mecca, to go to the house that Abraham built for God, and we're allowed to perform trade in that time. So Allah's given permission there. So we're going to go to the next item here that discusses divine law. So chapter 2, verses 275. Those who practice usury and interest, their condition is such as they will not be able to stand except like the standing of one who has lost his reason under the influence of Satan. That is so because they say trade is just like usury and interest, whereas Allah has made trade unlawful and made trade lawful and made interest unlawful. Then whosoever has received this admonition from his Lord and keeps away from usury and interest, he may keep whatever interest he has taken in the past. This matter rests with Allah. As for those who revert to the practice of usury and interest, it is those who are the fellows of the fire. Therein shall they live for long. So Allah is saying trade is lawful. So any trade, you don't need a license to trade. If you want your skills, obviously the corrupt governments and states and kingdoms of the world want to make all these bogus commerce legislation to say you need a license to do trade, you need license to drive, you need permits to do this, permits to do that, always going to the government who are playing God, which is the biggest sin you can possibly do, making up their own bogus legislation, calling them laws, and enforcing it upon us through different forms of violence, of extortion, of coercion, duress, and imprisonment, to enforce their unjust laws. As I've said many times, Allah says in chapter 5, verse 45, whomsoever does not judge according to the law, Allah has revealed it is they who are the very, very unjust. So make sure we don't deal with interest, if we're not dealing with usury. There is so much usury going on in the world. People don't really see it. I'm just going to quickly dabble into it. I don't want to point all the faults of what's going on in the world. I want to look more to the solutions, but to give us a balanced perspective, usury is so much like the fiat currency that we're dealing with. It's all interest based. The governments, states, even down to your local areas, are borrowing money on interest from banks. This in turn, the taxpayers of those areas are paying the principal plus the interest on top of that back. So the governments basically can have no liability, because if they don't They can overspend. It doesn't matter. They can just borrow more money, print money out of thin air, which is stealing from your savings, stealing from your salary because of supply and demand. If you're printing more money, there is more supply, and then demand is going down. So your buying power is reduced substantially. Every day, our money is worth less every day because every day they're printing more money. The usury that goes on, Allah has made trade lawful. So if you want to provide a service, anybody through trade, like say you wanted to build somebody a house, well, according to our government, states, and kingdoms of this world, you need to have certain licenses, you need to have certain permits, you got to pay off the governments, you got to pay off whoever, the insurance companies, whatever nonsense commerce laws that they come up with. It's all a form of usury, and it's all based on interest, debt, slavery system. So I'm not going to go too much detail about that. There are many other people who discuss that information if you wish to seek it on the internet. You can just look at birth certificates and stock exchanges. Or a birth certificate are traded on the stock market. This is old news. This information has been around for years now. This is something I knew, decades ago. But here I'm going to bring the solutions. So obviously, do not deal with interest or usury. And if you deal with interest and usury, and you've been admonished, and you don't give back your gains, well, hellfire will be waiting for you and be burning there for a long time, as the law says. Okay, so we're going to go to the next verse here, discussing more about interest. Chapter 2, verses 278 and 279. O you who believe, take Allah as your shield and forego all outstanding gains from usury and interest, if you are indeed believers. So if you're indeed believers, give back all your gains. Do not deal with usury and interest anymore. But if you do not, then beware of war from Allah and His messengers. But if you turn away from such an unlawful transaction, then you shall have your principal without interest back. Thus you shall neither deal unjustly nor be dealt with unjustly. So if you're dealing with interest, you're receiving interest money, well, Allah's saying to stop that, but you can receive the principal back. Say you loaned out $1,000 and you're charging, say, 10% in interest every month, and the guy didn't pay it back within the month, and it's up to $1,100. Well, you remit that $100 back to the person, and you just take back the principal of $1,000, and you'll be saved from the hellfire. Okay, so we're going to go to the next verse, which is discussing about the debtor's circumstances. So we're going to go to chapter 2, verses 280. If any debtor be in straitened circumstances, there shall be respite for him till his circumstances ease. But that if you remit the debt by way of charity, for the sake of God, it is better for you, if you only knew. So if the debtor, the person who has the loan, is running into difficulties, that God commands us to give that person respite until his circumstances ease. He could have got injured, or something could have happened, and he can't make the same amount of money he used to. So Allah is saying, give that man respite until he's recovered properly, to repay back that debt. But Allah is saying that what's even better is to remit the debt, to forgive the debt, and that's even better if you only knew. So it's better to give charity and not look for anything back in return, even when it comes to giving out loans and debts. That it's even better for us that if we forgive that debt. So it's very important to understand that. So the way that the unjust system of our world works, the legislation of commerce, that say you bought a property, you bought a mortgage from the bank, and you've been paying for 20 years, but something happened, you were unable to pay it back. The bank will only give you a little bit of time, maybe a couple of months, and if you don't pay up, well, they're just gonna, no matter what circumstances you're in, they're not gonna wait till your circumstances ease. They're just gonna take your house. Same with the governments of the states and kingdoms of the world. Basically, we don't own, well, here in North America, we don't own our properties here. It's all run by the state. You can only lease it from the state. If you're paying property taxes, if you're forced to pay property taxes, you don't own your own land. That's just basic common sense, because if you don't pay your property taxes or other taxes, the government will just take your property, will take your stuff. It doesn't matter. They don't care what situations you're in. They're very unjust, as I've said before. They don't judge according to divine law, to God's laws. They form their own laws, which are all based in commerce. It's all commerce legislation. So we're going to go to chapter 2, verses 282, and this is discussing more about loan transactions. O you who believe, when you transact a loan for a stipulated term, write it down. Let a scribe write it down in your presence in a term of equity and fairness. The scribe shall not refuse to write it, since it is Allah who taught him to write. Write he must, and let him upon whom the liability dictate, and let him observe his duty to Allah, his Lord, nor should you depreciate anything what he owes from it. But if the person upon whom liability is be of feeble mind, or is infirm, of incapable, or of directing himself, then let someone who can watch his best interests dictate in terms of equity and fairness, and call to witness the transaction 2 male witnesses from amongst your men. But if there not be 2 males available, then there be 1 male and 2 females, such as you approve as witnesses, to bear witness, so that if either of 2 women forget, when one may remind the other, and let the witnesses not refuse to give evidence whenever they are summoned. And never feel weary of writing it and the transaction down, whether it be the debt be small or large, with the time of payment being due. This is way more just in the sight of Allah, and ensures a more upright evidence, and is more likely to prevent you falling into doubts. So write it, except you carry ready trade, and transfer the merchandise from hand to hand. In that case there shall be no blame on you that you do not write the transaction. Yet have witnesses when you trade with one another. Let neither the scribe nor the witness be harmed. And if you do any such thing, then that indeed is disobedience on your part. Take Allah as a shield, with the result that Allah will grant you knowledge, for Allah has perfect knowledge of everything. So Allah is just discussing how to deal with trade. So if you're just making a hand-to-hand trade, you do not need like a receipt or something written down, a proof of purchase. If you're giving out a loan, make sure you write it down, you have some witnesses, things like that. So it's a very long and lengthy verse, but I'm not going to break it down so much, but just giving you the basics of that verse. So the next verse is also talking about transactions and loans. And if you be on a journey and do not find a scribe, then let there be a pledge with possession of some article to secure your debt. If one you entrusted something to another, let him who entrusts deliver his trust, and let him take Allah his Lord as a shield. Do not conceal the evidence, for whoso conceals it, his heart is certainly sinful. Allah is well aware of all that you do. So Allah is saying, if you're on a journey, etc., and you don't have a way to write down a contract for, say, like a loan, you can use an item to secure your debt, say like an expensive watch or whatever. If you're doing like a small loan or something, you can entrust the person. Make sure you take Allah as your shield in that transaction. You're always taking Allah as your shield in all your actions, actually. And make sure you do not conceal evidences. Allah knows everything. There's nothing that we can hide from. So make sure we are being dutiful on our trades and our loans, and not dealing in usury and interest. It's very basic stuff. Just going to go to quickly chapter 4, verses, 29. O you who believe, do not consume your property, one another's property, amongst yourselves by unlawful means. Rather be trade based on free mutual consent, and do not kill your people. Surely Allah has been ever merciful to you. So let's not consume one each other's properties like the banks and governments do. If you don't pay your loan on time, they'll give you very little respite. Doesn't matter what circumstances you're in. They'll just take your property if you're not paying your taxes, etc. They'll just take your property unjustly. We're going to go to the next verse, chapter 6, verse 52. And this is discussing the property of an orphan. And he has enjoined you that you do not approach the property of an orphan except in the fairest manner, until he attains his maturity and gives full measure and weight with equality. We charge no soul except to his capacity, and that when you speak, give your verdict, observe justice, even though a person concerned may be a relative of yours, and fulfill the covenant you made with Allah. That is what he enjoins upon you, so that you may take heed. So make sure we approach the property of an orphan with the fairest manner, until he attains maturity. You know, being an orphan is difficult enough as it is, and if you're gonna milk his his inheritance, it's a very big injustice to do to an orphan and in the sight of God. So make sure we're dealing fairly in our dealings. So we're going to go to chapter 9, verse 60. And Allah says, compulsory charities like zakat are meant for the destitute and the needy, and for its functionaries, and for those whose hearts require to be consoled in all sincerity, and for the encompassation of slaves, and for the relief of those in debt, and for spending in the cause of Allah, and for the wayfarer. This is an obligation imposed by Allah, for Allah is all-knowing, all-wise. So as believers, we're obligated to have compulsory charity to give to the needy and destitute, and for its functionaries, like for in case of like welfare, etc. People whose hearts need to be consoled, the slaves, to relieve people of debt, spending in the cause of Allah, and people who are traveling. We should save a portion of our wealth for these types of peoples and situations, and this will help bring about more abundance in the world. As I'll have a verse that will discuss that in further detail. So this is a very important verse for us to understand about the laws of trade. And we're going to go to chapter 17, verse 35. And give full measure when you measure out, and weigh with right and even balance. That is the best and most commendable in the long run. So whatever we're doing, we measure in full. We weigh with even and balanced scales, and this is most commendable and best for us in the long run. So, when we're dealing like with trade with one another, say I have a contract to build a house, and has a certain amount of level of quality of materials in the house. If I go, say, use cheaper materials than what's stated in the contract, I'm not being fully dutiful in my duties. If I'm cutting corners in the building of the house, I'm cutting corners here, cutting corners there, to thinking that I'm actually saving money or making more money for myself because I'm cutting costs and cutting time. But I'm not fulfilling the contract to its fullest. I'm being unjust to whoever I'm dealing with, and Allah forbids us to do that. So we make sure that we are being dutiful in our actions and fulfilling our duties to one another in our agreements and in our trades. So the next verse is going to also discuss about that, which is chapter 26, verses 181 to 183. And give full measure, and be not of those who give short, and weigh with even and balanced scales, and do not defraud people of their things. Do not go about acting corruptly and creating disorder in the country. So we've got to make sure our scales are working properly, that we're not fixing things for our favor. We are giving in full measure and not giving in short. We're not cheating people. If we're selling, say, rice, we're not, shorting people. Like if it's X amount of money for a pound of rice or a kilo of rice, we're not giving short. We're not putting in fake rice to add extra weight, etc., etc. We're being fair in our dealings with one another, and if we do so, Allah will be just with us as we are just with Allah's creation. Okay, so that's very important for us to understand. Make sure we don't defraud one another. So we're going to go to chapter 30, verse 39. And that which you lay out as interest and usury with a view to increase the wealth of the people does not help increase it in the sight of Allah. But that which you present as zakat, the purifying dues, with a view to seek whereby the pleasure of Allah, it is they, the regular prayers, it is they then who will increase the wealth many times over. So the people who are dealing with interest and usury cannot be reasoned with, as Allah says. They are like under the influence of Satan. They can't be reasoned with. They have lost their reason. They think usury and trade it will bring about more wealth in society. Well, and in fact, it is actually bringing more corruption, destruction, disharmony, usury of the people. And those who are giving charity, especially to the needy and people who are really down and out, this is how you increase your wealth many times over. So in the economy of Imam Mahdi, the Mashiach, the economy will be based on a charity, and this is how you increase wealth many times over. There will be no licenses for trade in the economy of Imam Mahdi. There will be no interest. There will be probably little to no insurance companies, as you should always take Allah as your shield, protector, and shield. There will be no licenses to drive, licenses to trade, permits, permission to build additions on home. As long as things are within harmony and balance and following the other divine laws of God, that you're not imposing your will on other people unjustly, that you're within harmony and balance within creation and your Creator, you have the right to property, you have the right to travel without restriction, unless you're creating some sort of mischief in the land. Then your travel can be restricted and be imprisoned or house arrest, for an example. That is if you're creating mischief. But if you're a good person doing good deeds, there should be no restriction upon you in travel, no restriction upon you in trade, and this is how the economy of Imam Mahdi Mashiach will be. So, inshallah. So these are some of the verses that have come across and divine trade, the divine laws of trade. Like I said, the governing bodies of the world, the states and the kingdoms, run on commerce law, commerce legislation, all based on money, all based on commerce. They look at us as cash cows. Our birth certificates are traded on the stock exchange, etc., etc. The government, states, and kingdoms of the world are very unjust, as I've said many times before. As Allah says in chapter 5, verse 45, and whomsoever does not judge according to the laws of Allah, they are very unjust. So Imam Mahdi, the Mashiach, inshallah, will be implementing these divine laws of freedom of travel, freedom of trade, no interest, no usury of any kind, no fiat currency that they can just inflate to a bill. They can just print as much money as they want. The currency that would probably be implemented would be probably more lines of gold and silver. In the economy of Imam Mahdi the Mashiach, they could maybe use some paper money, but there would have to be some definite safeguards that it would have to be backed by different types of commodities, and also the fiat currency would have to have microchips or something of that kind, something of that sort, to make sure there is no duplications of the money. There's no printing of excess money, that every dollar, every paper money is accounted for through these microchips and cannot be duplicated or very expensive to duplicate. So it would thwart out a lot of evil, a lot of corruption, a lot of the usury of inflation, the unjustness of interest. That'll be completely abolished in the economy of Imam Mahdi the Mashiach. So Most likely revert back to gold and silver. Currency can be used, but it would have to be backed by commodities and be microchipped, so it cannot be forged and duplicated, so we don't lose our spending power, our savings, etc. Possibly cryptocurrency may be used in the economy of Imam Mahdi the Mashiach. There are many safeguards with digital currency, but it would have to be given, it would have to be distributed fairly amongst the people, because if you have inequality, like you have too much rich people versus too many poor people, this is going to create inequality. So if there's any types of currencies, there's going to have to be a balance within the people, that Imam Mahdi the Mashiach will try to balance the economy to make sure there's not so much of an extreme of poverty and not so much of an extreme of rich people, that there is more of a balance, and this will thwart off a lot of crime, a lot of injustice, and produce, harmony and balance by implementing these divine laws. And doing what's right, stay away from usury, stay away from interest. This can bring you into the hellfire. So you've been warned. Allah has warned me, warned you, and inshallah the leadership, the Khalifa, will soon be present and reign in this world, and this corruption will end, inshallah, sooner than later, inshallah. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you take Allah as your shield and protector. I hope Allah increases you in knowledge and light. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for listening. Peace and blessings.